In the glittering halls of Greystone Manor, a lavish Venetian carnival hides a deadly secret. When charming art collector Lawrence Vane is found stabbed in the library, Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, unravels a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden affairs. A torn cape, a pearl button, and a whispered note lead her to a shocking truth. A friend's rage over a lover's deceit drove the dagger home. In just 30 seconds, step into a world of masks and motives where no one is what they seem, and murder waits in the shadows. Chapter 1: The Invitation in the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, where the hedgerows bloomed with late autumn roses and the church spire cast a long shadow over the green. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favourite armchair by the bay window. Her knitting, needles moved with a steady rhythm, crafting a pale blue shawl, while her eyes, sharp and bright despite her years, surveyed the familiar street. The butcher's boy cycled past, whistling, and Mrs. Polk's terrier yapped at a stray cat. It was a scene of such predictable calm that Miss Marple, with her knack for sensing the undercurrents beneath life's surface, felt a faint stir of anticipation. The postman's bicycle bell broke her reverie, its cheerful jingle heralding the arrival of the morning's mail. A single envelope, cream-coloured and embossed with the elegant crest of Greystone Manor, slid through the letterbox and landed on the polished floor of her cottage. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her fingers deftly retrieving the envelope. It was addressed to her in a bold, looping hand, and she recognized the sender at once. Sir Henry retired Commissioner of Scotland Yard and cousin to her old friend Colonel Arthur Bantry. Opening the envelope with a silver letter knife, Miss Marple unfolded a stiff card adorned with gold filigree. It was an invitation to a grand costume party at Greystone Manor, the ancestral home of Sir Henry's distant relation, Lady Beatrice Langley. The event, set for the following Saturday, promised a Venetian carnival theme, with masks and costumes to evoke the splendour of La Serenissima. The evening of mystery and merriment, the invitation declared, and Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Mystery, she thought, had a way of finding her, whether in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead or the grand halls of a manor. She leaned back, her mind turning to Greystone Manor, a sprawling estate some 30 miles from her village. She had visited once, years ago, and recalled its ivy-clad walls, its oak-panelled rooms, and the faint air of secrets that clung to old houses. Lady Beatrice, a widow of considerable charm and wealth, was known for her lavish gatherings, though Miss Marple suspected her generosity masked a deeper need for control. Sir Henry, ever the genial host, would no doubt be there, his sharp mind hidden behind a jovial exterior. The invitation hinted at a guest list of eclectic characters, and Miss Marple's curiosity, honed by years of observing human nature, was piqued. She rose, smoothing her tweed skirt, and crossed to her writing desk. A quick note to Sir Henry confirmed her attendance, though she hesitated over her costume. The Venetian theme suggested opulence, but Miss Marple preferred simplicity. A Renaissance lady, she decided, in a modest velvet gown and a lace mask, would suit her perfectly. It would allow her to blend into the crowd unnoticed, as she so often preferred. For Miss Marple knew that the truest revelations came not from being seen, but from watching the glances, the gestures, the unguarded moments that betrayed the heart's secrets as she sealed her reply. A breeze stirred the lace curtains, carrying the scent of damp leaves. Miss Marple's gaze returned to the street, where the postman was now chatting with the vicar's wife. All seemed as it should be, Yet she felt a prickle of unease, as if the invitation in her hand were more than a summons to a party. In St. Mary Mead, she had unravelled scandals and sins hidden behind polite smiles. Greystone Manor, she suspected, would be no different. With a final click of her needles, she resumed her knitting, her mind already weaving a pattern of possibilities for the night ahead. Chapter 2. Arrival at Greystone Manor. The October dusk draped Greystone Manor in a velvet hush, its ancient stone walls glowing faintly under the rising moon. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, as Miss Jane Marple's hired car crunched along the gravel drive. She adjusted her lace mask, its delicate filigree framing her keen eyes, and smoothed the folds of her Renaissance gown, a deep green velvet chosen for its understated elegance. The costume, borrowed from a theatrical friend in St. Mary Mead, was simple yet dignified, allowing her to slip through the evening's grandeur unnoticed, a position from which she could observe the subtleties of human behavior, which, as she well knew, often spoke louder than words. The manor loomed ahead, its mullioned windows ablaze with golden light that spilled onto the manicured lawns. Torches flanked the entrance, their flames dancing in the breeze, casting flickering shadows on the guests alighting from their cars. Miss Marple stepped down, her sensible shoes silent on the stone steps, and paused to take in the scene. The air buzzed with anticipation, a heady mix of laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint strains of a string quartet drifting from within. Guests in extravagant costumes, pierrots with ruffled collars, doges in brocade robes, and courtesans with glittering masks swept past her, their voices bright with the thrill of anonymity. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Masks, she thought, were as much a shield for secrets as they were a disguise for faces. Sir Henry Clethering, resplendent in a harlequin's motley of black and red diamonds, greeted her at the grand oak doors. His broad face beamed beneath a half-mask, but his eyes, sharp as ever, betrayed the mind of a man who missed little. "Miss Marple, my dear lady, you do us honour," he boomed, taking her hand with a courtly bow. "I trust the journey was pleasant." "Quite pleasant, Sir Henry," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "Though I confess, a Venetian carnival is a far cry from St. Mary Mead's garden fetes." He chuckled, guiding her into the marble-floored hall. "Oh, you'll find plenty to observe tonight. Beatrice has outdone herself. Come, let me introduce you to the luminaries of our little masquerade." The hall opened into a vast ballroom, its crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light across a sea of silks and satins. The Venetian theme was everywhere. Gondola-shaped tables held silver trays of canops, and frescoes of canals adorned the walls, their painted waters shimmering under candlelight. Guests swirled in a kaleidoscope of colour, their masks lending an air of intrigue that Miss Marple found both fascinating and faintly unsettling. She had seen too many village intrigues to believe that anonymity bred only harmless fun, sir. Henry led her toward a statuesque woman in a gold-threaded gown, her auburn hair piled high beneath a jewelled tiara. Her mask, a confection of peacock feathers, did little to conceal her commanding presence. "Lady Beatrice Langley," Sir Henry announced, "our gracious host." Lady Beatrice turned, her smile radiant but practised. "Miss Marple, how delightful," she said, her voice rich with the polish of high society. "Sir Henry speaks so highly of your perception. I do hope you enjoy our little spectacle." "I'm certain I shall," Miss Marple replied, her eyes noting the slight tension in Lady Beatrice's fingers as they clutched a fan. Was it the strain of hosting, or something more? The manor is magnificent, and your guests seem quite enchanted. Oh, they're a lively lot, Lady Beatrice said, waving her fan toward the crowd. We have artists, collectors, even a few rogues, I dare say. But tonight, we're all players in Venice's grand drama. Sir Henry steered Miss Marple onward, introducing her to a wiry man in a black velvet doublet, his mask a stark white oval that accentuated his restless eyes. Mr. Felix Duval, our costume designer, Sir Henry said. He's turned us all into works of art tonight. Felix bowed, his movements jerky, as if his nerves were strung too tight. A pleasure, mademoiselle, he said, his French accent sharp, though I fear my designs pale beside the manor's splendor. His hands fidgeted with a silk scarf at his waist, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his fingers. A man ill at ease, she thought, though whether from temperament or circumstance, she could not yet say. Next came Mrs. Clara Hodges, the caterer, a stout woman in a plain black domino that contrasted with her flushed cheeks. She bustled over from a table laden with crystal flutes and pastries, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Oh, Miss Marple, is it?" she said, her voice warm but harried. "I hope you're enjoying the spread. Been up since dawn, I have, to get it all right." "It's splendid," Miss Marple said kindly, her gaze lingering on Clara's quick glance toward the ballroom's edge, where a group of guests whispered behind their masks. A caterer, Miss Marple knew from village life, saw more than most servants always did. Finally, Sir Henry introduced Mr. Roger Blake, a tall man in a gondolier's striped shirt and straw hat, his mask a simple black band that failed to dim. His striking features, his smile was easy, his handshake firm, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of intensity in his blue eyes. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished oak, "Sir Henry tells me you're a marvel at puzzles. I hope you find our party amusing." "I find people the greatest puzzle of all," she replied, her tone light but her eyes searching. Roger's laugh was hearty, yet she sensed a guardedness beneath it, like a door half-dash closed. As Sir Henry was called away to greet another guest, Miss Marple found herself near the edge of the ballroom, a vantage point from which she could observe the whirl of dancers and the murmur of conversations. She sipped a glass of lemonade, its tartness grounding her thoughts, and let her gaze roam. Lady Beatrice glided among her guests, her laughter bright but her eyes darting, as if seeking someone or something. Felix Duval hovered near a display of costumes, adjusting a feather here, a hem there, his movements fussy yet distracted. Clara Hodges bustled between tables, her sharp eyes missing nothing, though her smile faltered when she thought herself unobserved. And Roger Blake, leaning against a pillar, watched the crowd with an intensity that belied his casual pose. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, where she had seen such gatherings before, not in grand manors, perhaps, but in village halls and vicarages. The masks might be different, but the human heart was the same, proud, secretive, and capable of great folly. She recalled a fate where a stolen glance between a grocer's wife and a schoolmaster had unravelled a scandal. Here, among the silks and sequins, she sensed similar currents, jealousies, rivalries, perhaps even betrayals. Her attention was drawn to a man in a gondolier's costume, not Roger but another, his cape swirling as he moved through the crowd. He was Lawrence Vane, Sir Henry had mentioned earlier, a wealthy art collector and the evening's guest of honour, celebrated for his recent acquisition of a Tintoretto painting. His mask, A gilded affair with a long nose gave him an air of mystery, but his laughter was loud, his gestures expansive. Miss Marple watched as he paused to speak with Roger, their heads bent close, their voices low. A moment later, Roger's hand gripped Lawrence's arm, a gesture too brief to be noticed by most, but not by Miss Marple. Tension, she thought, and not the friendly kind. The music swelled, a waltz that drew couples to the floor, their costumes a blur of colour. Miss Marple declined a dance with a jovial Pierrot, preferring to remain at her post. She noted Lady Beatrice's quick glance toward Lawrence, followed by a forced smile as she turned to a guest. Felix, too, watched Lawrence, his eyes narrowing behind his mask. Clara, carrying a tray of volume events, passed close to the two men, her face tightening as she overheard a snippet of their conversation. Miss Marple's knitting, had she brought it, would have paused. Something was amiss, though she could not yet name it. As the evening wore on, the air grew warmer, the laughter louder, the masks slipping both literally and figuratively. Miss Marple moved quietly through the crowd, her small figure unnoticed amid the grandeur. She paused by a table where a young woman, Miss Sylvia Grey, stood alone, her silver mask dangling from her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and Miss Marple recognized the look of a heart burdened by secrets. Sylvia's gaze followed Lawrence, and Miss Marple wondered if love, or its absence, played a role in the evening's undercurrents. A footman approached, offering her a program of the night's events, a midnight unmasking, a toast to Lawrence's Tintoretto, and a display of fireworks over the manor's lake. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning to the painting. Art, she knew, could inspire passion or greed. In St. Mary Mead, a dispute over a single watercolour had once led to a broken engagement. What might a Tintoretto, real or rumoured, provoke? The clock struck 10, and the ballroom pulsed with life. Miss Marple found a velvet-upholstered chair near a potted palm, a perfect spot to watch without being watched. She thought of Sir Henry's stories of Scotland Yard, where clues were found not in grand gestures but in the small, the overlooked glance, a hesitation, a misplaced word. Tonight, she sensed, such clues were all around her, hidden beneath the masks and the music. As she watched Lawrence Vane laugh with a group of admirers, Roger's eyes fixed on him from across the room, she felt that prickle of unease again, sharper now. Greystone Manor, for all its splendour, was a stage, and the play, she feared, was veering toward tragedy. The string quartet struck up a new tune, and the guests surged forward, their costumes a riot of colour and movement. Miss Marple's eyes, bright behind her laced mask, missed nothing. She would watch, and she would listen, for she knew that before the night was out, the truth, whatever it might be, would begin to reveal itself, as it always did, to those who knew where to look. Chapter 3. The stab in the dark. The ballroom of Greystone Manor shimmered with the opulence of the Venetian carnival, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the swirling dancers. The string quartet played a lilting sarabande, and the air was thick with the sense of jasmine perfume and beeswax candles. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively near a velvet-draped alcove, watched the scene with her characteristic calm, her lace mask resting lightly on her face, her green velvet gown blended into the shadows, allowing her to observe the guests, without drawing attention. The masks, she noted, gave the evening a peculiar intensity, as if the anonymity freed hidden passions to flicker like the torchlight outside. Lawrence Vane, the evening's celebrated guest, moved through the crowd, with the confidence of a man accustomed to admiration. His gondolier's costume, with its flowing cape and gilded mask, marked him as a figure of note, and his booming laugh carried over the music. Miss Marple's sharp eyes followed him, catching the way his gestures grew more animated as he spoke. With a cluster of guests near the grand fireplace, she also noted Roger Blake, standing a little apart, his own gondolier's attire less flamboyant, but his gaze fixed on Lawrence with an intensity that bordered on predatory. Something, Miss Marple thought, was brewing beneath the surface of this festive night. The clock had just chimed 11 when a piercing scream shattered the merriment. It came from the direction of the library, a panelled room off the main corridor, its doors half open to the cool night air. The music faltered, the dancers froze, and a ripple of unease spread through the room. Miss Marple rose, her small figure moving swiftly yet unobtrusively toward the source of the disturbance. She reached the library just as a young woman in a silver domino stumbled out, her mask askew, her face pale with horror. "He's dead," she gasped, clutching at a nearby guest. "Mr. Vane, he's dead." A murmur of shock swept through the crowd as Sir Henry Clithering pushed forward, his harlequins motley at odds with his grim expression. "Stay back, please," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of his Scotland Yard days. Miss Marple slipped into the library behind him, her presence unnoticed in the chaos. The room was dimly lit by a single candelabrum, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the bookshelves. In the centre, sprawled across a Persian rug, lay Lawrence Vane. His gondolier's cape was splayed like dark wings, and a dagger protruded from his chest, its hilt gleaming dully. A stain of crimson spread across his white shirt, stark against the black stripes of his costume. Miss Marple's eyes took in the scene with clinical precision. The dagger was no costume prop. Its blade was short but wickedly sharp, the kind used for practical rather than decorative purposes. Lawrence's gilded mask had slipped, revealing a face frozen in a grimace of surprise. His right hand clutched at the air, as if he had tried to fend off his attacker. The library's French doors stood ajar, leading to a terrace where the night breeze stirred the curtains. Miss Marple noted a faint scuff mark on the polished floor near the doors, as if someone had moved quickly, perhaps in flight. Sir Henry knelt beside the body, his fingers checking for a pulse, though the outcome was clear. "He's gone," he said quietly, rising to face the gathering crowd. Lady Beatrice Langley appeared at the threshold, her peacock-feathered mask in her hand, her face drained of colour. "Oh, Lawrence," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who could have done this?" Miss Marple, standing near a bookshelf, observed the reactions of those around her. Lady Beatrice's shock seemed genuine, but her eyes darted toward the terrace, as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. Felix Duval, the costume designer, hovered near the door, his white mask clutched tightly, his thin frame trembling. "Mon Dieu," he muttered, his accent thicker in his agitation. "This is madness." Mrs. Clara Hodges, the caterer, pushed through the crowd, her black domino askew, her hands twisting her apron. "I was in the kitchen," she said, unprompted, her voice shrill. "I didn't see anything." Roger Blake stood at the back, his face unreadable behind his black mask, but his fists were clenched, his knuckles white. Sir Henry took charge, directing the footman to seal the library and keep the guests in the ballroom. "No one leaves until the constable arrives," he said firmly, "and no one touches anything." He glanced at Miss Marple, a silent acknowledgement of her presence, and she gave a slight nod. She had no official role, but Sir Henry knew her gift for seeing what others missed. As the guests were herded back to the ballroom, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning the room. The library was a treasure trove of potential clues, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, its tables cluttered with decanters and crystal glasses. A single glass lay tipped over near Lawrence's body, a faint trace of amber liquid pooling on the rug. Brandy, Miss Marple thought, noting the decanter. On a nearby table, had Lawrence been drinking alone or with his killer? She stepped closer to the French doors, her gaze falling on the scuff mark. It was faint, but distinct, a smudge of dirt, perhaps from a shoe, suggesting a hurried exit. Beyond the terrace, the manor's gardens stretched into darkness, a maze of hedges and paths that could conceal anyone. She returned to the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Lawrence's cape bore a small tear near the shoulder, not from the dagger, but from some other force of struggle, perhaps. A glint caught her eye. A tiny pearl button, embroidered with a delicate F, lay half hidden beneath the rugs. Fringe. Miss Marple's mind raced. Felix Duval's costumes were meticulous. Such a button might belong to one of his creations. But whose? She tucked the observation away, knowing it might prove significant. The local constable, a young man named Inspector Harrow, arrived within the hour, his face flushed with the weight of responsibility. He was competent but inexperienced, and Miss Marple sensed he would welcome Sir Henry's guidance. As Harrow began his preliminary examination, Miss Marple slipped back to the ballroom, where the guests whispered in anxious knots. The music had stopped, the chandelier's light now harsh rather than festive. She found a chair near the edge of the room, her small figure blending into the background, and watched. Lady Beatrice stood by the fireplace, surrounded by concerned guests, her composure fraying as she clutched her fan. Felix paced near the refreshment table, his eyes darting to the library doors as if expecting them to burst open. Clara Hodges bustled about, offering trays of untouched pastries, her movements mechanical, her face strained. Roger Blake leaned against a pillar, his mask now removed, his expression a mask of its own come, almost to calm. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village scandals she had unravelled in St. Mary Mead, where a quiet demeanour often hid the fiercest passions. Roger's stillness, she thought, was not indifference but control. She overheard snatches of conversation, a guest murmuring about Lawrence's wealth, another speculating about his Tintoretto painting, rumoured to be the centrepiece of the evenings. Toast. Miss Marple recalled Sir Henry's mention of the painting's value and the whispers of its questionable authenticity. Could it be a motive? Greed, she knew, was a powerful spur, but so was betrayal, and the tension she had seen between Lawrence and Roger suggested something personal. As Inspector Harrow emerged from the library to question the guests, Miss Marple's mind worked quietly. The dagger, the scuff mark, the torn cape, the buttonhole were pieces of a puzzle, and she knew from experience that the truth lay in their arrangement. The library's isolation, its open doors to the terrace, suggested an opportunist's act, yet the dagger's precision hinted at intent. Someone had known Lawrence would be there, alone, vulnerable. Someone, perhaps, who had lured him to the library. The ballroom grew quieter as the guests awaited their turn with the inspector. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the key figures. Lady Beatrice, whose elegance masked a flicker of fear. Felix, whose nervous energy seemed to hide more than mere shock. Clara, whose protestations of ignorance were too quick. And Roger, whose calm was a study in restraint. Each, she thought, wore a mask beyond their costume, and one of them had struck in the dark dot as the clock neared midnight. The unmasking hour forgotten, Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of intuition. The night's tragedy was no random act, but a culmination of hidden currents, love, envy, or vengeance. She could not yet say, but she would watch, and she would listen, for the truth, as it always did in her quiet village, would reveal itself in the smallest of details. Chapter 4. The Host's Burden. The Grand Ballroom of Greystone Manor. So recently a stage 4 revelry had transformed into a sombre arena of suspicion. The chandeliers still glittered, but their light now fell on hushed groups of guests, their masks discarded, their faces etched with unease. The string quartet had long since packed away their instruments, and the air carried a chill that no amount of candlelight could dispel. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in her alcove, her green velvet gown blending into the shadows, her lace mask resting in her lap. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from face to face, noting the subtle tells that betrayed hidden thoughts, a tightened lip, a fleeting glance, a hand that trembled just so. Inspector Harrow, the young constable, had set up a makeshift interview room in the manor's drawing room, its heavy brocade curtains drawn against the night. Sir Henry Clithering, his harlequin costume now seeming a mockery of the evening's tragedy, assisted with quiet authority, guiding guests to and fro. Miss Marple, though not officially involved, had been invited by Sir Henry to observe the interviews, her presence accepted with a nod from the inspector, who sensed her quiet perceptiveness. She settled into a backed chair near the fireplace, her small figure unobtrusive, her mind as active as the flames that flickered in the grate. Lady Beatrice Langley was the first to be questioned, her gold-threaded gown catching the firelight. As she entered, she had removed her peacock-feathered mask, revealing a face pale but composed, her auburn hair still impeccably arranged. Yet Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed her skirts, the way her eyes avoided the inspector's direct gaze. Lady Beatrice was a woman accustomed to control, and this loss of it, Miss Marple thought, was as unsettling to her as the murder itself. Lady Beatrice, Inspector Harrow began, his notebook open, his tone respectful but firm. You were the host of this evening's gathering. Can you tell us about your relationship with Mr. Lawrence Vane? Lady Beatrice's lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Lawrence was a dear friend, she said, her voice measured, a collector of fine art, as you may know, and a man of great charm. I invited him to celebrate his recent acquisition, a Tintoretto painting, quite exquisite. This party was partly in his honor. Miss Marple's fingers, which might have held knitting needles in another setting, twitched slightly. The Tintoretto again, she thought. Its mention seemed to follow Lawrence like a shadow. And how did Mr. Vane seem this evening? She asked softly, her voice so gentle it might have been mistaken for idle curiosity. Lady Beatrice turned, startled, as if noticing Miss Marple for the first time. He was himself, she replied, hesitating. Jovial, perhaps a touch preoccupied. He spoke of the painting, of course, and mingled with the guests. I saw nothing amiss until her voice faltered, and she pressed a hand to her lips, until the scream, Inspector Harrow prompted, glancing at his notes. Can you account for your movements in the hour before Mr. Vane was found? I was in the ballroom, Lady Beatrice said quickly, greeting guests, ensuring everything ran smoothly. A hostess's duties are endless, you know. She gave a small, brittle laugh, but her fingers twisted the pearl necklace at her throat. The beads clicking softly, Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen such gestures, Mrs. Price at the vicarage tea, twisting her brooch when questioned about a missing collection plate. Nervousness, she knew, could mean many things, but it rarely meant nothing. "Did you notice Mr. Vane speaking with anyone in particular?" she asked, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the window. "He spoke with many people," she said at last. "But I did see him with Mr. Blake, Roger. Blake, that is near the library, earlier. They seemed intense. I assumed it was a private matter." "Intense? How?" Inspector Harrow pressed, his pencil poised double quotes. "Oh, you know how men can be," Lady Beatrice said, waving a hand. "A disagreement, perhaps over business. Lawrence was involved in many ventures, and Roger, well, Roger is a passionate sort, but I didn't eavesdrop. It wasn't my place." Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind filing away the word passionate. In her village, passion had led to more than one regrettable act: a jilted suitor breaking a rival's window, a betrayed wife poisoning a Sunday roast. She wondered what private matter bound Lawrence and Roger, and why Lady Beatrice seemed so reluctant to elaborate. "Where were you when the scream was heard?" Inspector Harrow asked, his tone sharpening. "In the ballroom, near the refreshment table," Lady Beatrice replied. "I was speaking with Mrs. Hodges about the champagne. Then that poor girl Miss Gray, I believe, came running out, and I followed the crowd to the library." Her voice caught, and she pressed her fan to her chest. "It was dreadful, simply dreadful." Inspector Harrow nodded, jotting a note. "And you saw no one near the library before that?" "No one," Lady Beatrice said firmly, though her eyes flicked to the side as if searching for an escape. Miss Marple noted the gesture, recalling a St. Mary Mead spinster who had lied about a stolen pie with just such a glance. Lies, she knew, were often betrayed by the smallest movements. As Lady Beatrice was dismissed, she rose with a rustle of silk, her composure restored but her steps hurried. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the details: the Tintoretto painting, the intense conversation, the twisted pearls, all were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. Lady Beatrice's role as hostess gave her freedom to move about the manor, yet her nervousness suggested a burden beyond the shock of murder. Was it grief for a friend, or fear of something uncovered? Sir Henry leaned close, his voice low. "What do you make of her, Miss Marple? She is hiding." "Something," Miss Marple murmured, her eyes still on the door through which Lady Beatrice had vanished. "Not necessarily guilt, but something. In my village, Sir Henry, a woman once organized a fete to distract from her husband's debts. Lady Beatrice's party feels purposeful, don't you think?" Sir Henry's eyebrows rose, but he said nothing, trusting her instinct. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the library, the open French doors, the scuff mark, the pearl button. Lady Beatrice had not mentioned the library's terrace, yet her glance toward the window suggested she knew more than she said. Had she seen someone there, or was she protecting another? As the next guest was summoned, Miss Marple leaned back, her mind as active as ever. The drawing room, with its heavy curtains and ticking clock, felt like a stage where truths were being carefully rehearsed. Lady Beatrice's burden, whatever it was only one piece of the puzzle. The night was young, and Miss Marple knew that the secrets of Greystone Manor, like those of St. Mary Mead, would unravel in their own time, revealed by the careless gestures and unguarded words of those who thought themselves unseen. Chapter 5. The designer's secret. The drawing room of Greystone Manor, with its brocade curtains and flickering firelight, had taken on a sombre air, far removed from the Venetian carnival's earlier gaiety. The heavy tick of the mantel clock marked the slow passage of time as Inspector Harrow conducted his interviews, his youthful earnestness tempered by Sir Henry Clithering's steady presence. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in her corner, her green velvet gown pooling around her. Like a shadow, her keen eyes missing nothing. The lace mask lay folded in her lap, no longer needed, for the true masks, she knew, were the ones worn in the heart, those of fear, guilt, or deceit. Felix Duval, the costume designer, was called next. He entered with a nervous gait, his black velvet doublet slightly askew, as if he had been tugging at it in agitation. His white oval mask, now clutched in his hand, revealed a sallow face with sharp cheekbones and eyes that darted like trapped birds. His French accent, so charming in the ballroom, now carried a brittle edge, and his fingers fidgeted with the silk scarf at his waist, twisting it into knots. Miss Marple watched him closely, her mind recalling a St. Mary Mead tailor who had trembled just so when questioned about a pilfered bolt of cloth. Nervousness, she thought, was a poor disguise for secrets. Mr. Duval. Inspector Harrow began, his notebook open, his tone measured. You designed the costumes for this evening's event, including Mr. Vane's, I understand. Can you tell us about your relationship with him? Felix's lips twitched into a thin smile. Relationship, a professional one, monsieur. I designed Monsieur Vane's gondolier, costume a rush job, you understand, as he only confirmed his attendance. Last week, he was particular about the details. His voice held a trace of resentment, quickly masked by a shrug. But he paid well, usually. Inspector Harrow's pencil paused, catching the word like a hound on a scent. Felix's eyes flicked to the side, and he shifted in his chair. Well, there were delays, sometimes. Monsieur Vane owed me for previous work a mask in London, some months ago. He promised to settle tonight, after the party. His fingers tightened on the scarf, and Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. So you had a financial disagreement with the victim, Inspector Harrow said, his voice sharpening. Did this cause any tension between you? Tension? Felix's laugh was high and strained. Nan, nothing serious. A small matter, quickly resolved. I am an artist, not a banker. I focus on my work, not disputes. But his eyes betrayed him, darting toward the door as if he longed to flee. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft as a whisper of silk. Mr. Duval, your costumes are exquisite. I noticed Mr. Vane's cape had a tear, not from the dagger, but elsewhere. Did you see anything that might explain it? Felix started, his hands jerking as if stung. A tear. I did not notice. Perhaps in the dancing, it caught on something. My work is meticulous, mademoiselle, I assure you. But his voice wavered, and Miss Marple's mind turned to the pearl button she had found in the library, embroidered with an F. Felix's initials, perhaps, or a clue to another's costume. Where were you in the hour before Mr. Vane was found? Inspector Harrow asked, his eyes narrowing. Felix hesitated, his fingers now shredding the scarf's edge. I was in the ballroom, adjusting a guest's mask, a lady in a columbine costume. Her feathers were loose. I stepped into the corridor briefly to fetch a pin from my kit. I was alone only a moment. His words tumbled out too quickly, and Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a St. Mary Mead seamstress who had claimed to be fetching thread, when caught slipping a neighbour's silver spoon into her pocket. Alibis, she knew, were often as fragile as gossamer. Which corridor? Inspector Harrow pressed. the one leading to the library. Yes, but I did not go near it. Felix's voice rose, his accent thickening. I returned to the ballroom at once. Ask the lady, Miss Grey, I think. She saw me. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened at the mention of Sylvia Grey, the young woman she had seen earlier, pale and tearful. Sylvia's connection to Lawrence Vane was becoming clearer, and Felix's mention of her felt deliberate, as if he were casting a net to divert attention. Did you see Mr. Vane or Mr. Blake in the corridor? She asked gently, her tone as disarming as a village gossip's. Felix's gaze flickered, and he shook his head. No, mademoiselle, I saw no one. I was too busy with my work, but his hands betrayed him, clenching the scarf until his knuckles whitened. Inspector Harrow made a note, his expression skeptical. And you heard nothing unusual? No raised voices, no struggle? Nothing, Felix said, too quickly. The music was loud, the guests were laughing. I was focused on my duties. He glanced at Sir Henry, as if seeking rescue, but Sir Henry's face remained impassive. Miss Marple's mind was busy, weaving threads of observation. Felix's nervousness was more than the shock of murder. It was the agitation of a man with something to hide. The unpaid bills suggested emotive money troubles could drive desperate acts, as she had seen in St. Mary Mead when a grocer's debts led to a barn fire meant to claim insurance. But Felix's mention of Sylvia Grey intrigued her more. Was he deflecting suspicion, or had he truly been with her? And that button, could it be his, or did it point to another? As Felix was dismissed, he rose with a jerky bow, his scarf now a tangled mess. I am at your service, Inspector, he said, but his eyes avoided Miss Marple's as he hurried from the room. She watched him go, her thoughts turning to the library's scuff mark and the open French doors. Felix's alibi was thin, his movements vague, and his connection to Lawrence Vane, however professional, carried the weight of resentment. Sir Henry leaned close, his voice a murmur. A jumpy fellow, isn't he? What's your take, Miss Marple? He's frightened, she replied softly, her eyes still on the door. Not just of the murder, but of what might be uncovered. In my village, Sir Henry, a nervous man once, hid a theft behind a flurry of excuses. Mr. Duval's excuses are incomplete. Sir Henry nodded, his harlequin's bells jingling faintly. The button you mentioned, think it's his. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. Or perhaps it belongs to someone he knows. Costumes, you see, are his domain. He would know whose buttons match whose attire. Her mind flickered to Roger Blake, whose gondolier costume had been less ornate than Lawrence's, and to Lady Beatrice, whose elegance might conceal a different sort of artistry, as the next guest was summoned. Miss Marple settled back, her small hands folded in her lap. The drawing-room's warmth could not dispel the chill of suspicion that hung over Greystone Manor. Felix Duval's secret, whatever it was only one piece of the puzzle. The night's tragedy, she felt, was a tapestry of motives: greed, perhaps, or pride, or something deeper still. She would listen, and she would watch for the truth, as it had in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, would reveal itself in the smallest of slips. Chapter 6. The Caterer's Tale. The drawing-room of Greystone Manor, with its crackling fire and heavy curtains, had become a stage for revelations, each interview peeling back another layer of the night's tragedy. Miss Jane Marple sat in her unobtrusive corner, her green velvet gown blending into the shadows, her sharp eyes catching every flicker of emotion. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint tang of spilled brandy from the library, a reminder of the violence that had shattered the Venetian carnival. Inspector Harrow, his notebook worn at the edges, maintained a steady demeanour, while Sir Henry Clithering stood by, his harlequin costume now a jarring contrast to the gravity of the moment. Miss Marple, though silent, was a quiet force, her presence a subtle invitation for truths to slip through the cracks of carefully crafted stories. Mrs. Clara Hodges, the caterer, was summoned next. She bustled into the room, her black domino cloak slipping from her shoulders to reveal a practical apron beneath, stained faintly with flour and grease. Her round face was flushed, her dark hair escaping its pins, and her hands twisted a crumpled cloth as if it were an anchor in a storm. Miss Marple noted the woman's quick, darting glances toward the inspector, the door, the fire, as if she feared something might leap out at her. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had known a baker's wife whose nervous fidgeting had betrayed her knowledge of a neighbour's affair. Clara, she thought, was similarly burdened, though by what? She could not yet say. Mrs. Hodges, Inspector Harrow began, his voice calm but probing. You were responsible for the catering tonight. Can you tell us about your interactions with Mr. Lawrence Vane? Clara's hands tightened on the cloth, her knuckles whitening. Interactions? Oh, I barely spoke to him, sir, she said, her voice high and hurried. I was run off my feet. What with the canapes and the champagne and making sure the staff didn't muck things up. Mr. Vane was a guest. You see, not my business to chat with him. Her words tumbled out, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Over-protestation, she knew, was often a sign of something withheld. Did you see him at all during the evening? Inspector Harrow asked, his pencil poised. Clara hesitated, her gaze flicking to the window, where the night pressed against the glass. Well, yes, I suppose I did, she admitted. He was in the ballroom, laughing, drinking, same as everyone. I saw him near the library corridor, talking with Mr. Blake. They looked heated, like they were arguing, but I didn't catch what about. I was too busy, you understand, carrying trays, checking the kitchen. Her voice faltered, and she dabbed her cloth at her brow. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her tone as gentle as a village confidant's. Mrs. Hodges, you must have a keen eye, managing such a grand event. Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Vane or Mr. Blake during their conversation? Clara's eyes widened, as if startled by the question's softness. Unusual? Well, I suppose Mr. Vane was gesturing a lot, like he was upset, and Mr. Blake was standing close, too close, if you ask me. But I didn't linger. It's not my place to eavesdrop on guests. She paused, then added, almost to herself, Mr. Vane was always one for secrets, though. Too fond of them, if you ask me. Secrets? Inspector Harrow's voice sharpened. What do you mean by that? Clara's flush deepened, and she twisted the cloth tighter. Oh, nothing specific, sir. Just talk, you know. Servants hear things. Mr. Vane was a charmer, always whispering with this lady or that, making promises he didn't keep. I heard he'd upset someone, but I don't know who. Kitchen gossip, that's all. Her words were dismissive, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, as if she regretted her candour. Miss Marple's mind turned over the phrase, too fond of secrets. In St. Mary Mead, such gossip had once led her to a stolen will hidden in a teapot. Secrets, she knew, were the currency of betrayal, and Lawrence Vane's penchant for them suggested a tangle of motives. "Did you see anyone else near the library corridor?" she asked, her voice mild but precise. Clara shook her head too quickly. "No, ma'am. I was back in the kitchen by then, checking the tarts. I didn't see nothing nobody, I mean." Her slip drew a raised eyebrow from Inspector Harrow, and Miss Marple noted the correction. A slip of the tongue, or a sign of something more. "Where were you when the scream was heard?" Inspector Harrow asked, his pencil scratching against the paper. "In the kitchen, sir," Clara said firmly. "I was plating the last of the volume events when Miss Grey came running in, screaming about Mr. Vane. I followed her out, saw the crowd, and, well, you know the rest." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady now, as if she had rehearsed this part of her tale. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the library, the scuff mark, the open French doors, the pearl button, with its embroidered F. Clara's role as caterer gave her access to every corner of the manor, her bustling presence unnoticed by guests absorbed in their revelry. Could she have slipped into the library, perhaps to overhear more than she admitted? And her mention of Lawrence's secrets, had she stumbled on one too dangerous to keep? "Did you know Mr. Vane well?" Inspector Harrow asked, his tone probing. "Not well, sir," Clara replied, her hands stilling for the first time. "He was a guest here before, at Lady Beatrice's summer ball. Always polite, but distant, like he was watching everyone, weighing them up. I didn't like it, if I'm honest." She bit her lip, as if regretting the admission. Miss Marple's mind flicked to a St. Mary, Mead cook who had once confessed to overhearing a quarrel that led to a broken engagement. Servants, she knew, saw more than they were meant to, and Clara's unease suggested she had seen or heard something significant. "Mrs. Hodges," Miss Marple said softly, "you mentioned Mr. Vane's secrets. Did you ever hear anything specific, perhaps about his Tintoretto painting?" Clara's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously. "The painting? Oh no, ma'am, I don't know nothing about that. Just that it was valuable, and Mr. Vane was proud of it. I heard some guests whispering it might not be real, but that's not my business." Her voice was firm, but her fingers resumed their twisting, betraying her discomfort. Inspector Harrow made a note, his expression thoughtful. "And you saw no one else near the library before the scream?" "No one," Clara said, her voice steady now. "I was too busy to notice much, sir. A caterer's work never stops, you know." But her eyes flicked to the door, as if eager to escape the room's scrutiny. As Clara was dismissed, she rose with a bustle, smoothing her apron and muttering about checking the kitchen. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind weaving connections. Clara's tale was plausible, but its gaps were telling. Her quick denial of seeing anyone near the library, her slip about nothing nobody, and her vague allusion to Lawrence's secrets all pointed to knowledge she was reluctant to share. Had she witnessed more of the argument between Lawrence and Roger, or was there another secret she guarded? Sir Henry leaned close, his voice a low murmur. "She's holding something back, isn't she?" Miss Marple nodded, her eyes still on the door. "She knows more than she says, Sir Henry. In my village, a woman like Mrs. Hodges would hear every whisper, see every glance. Her talk of secrets wasn't idle. She's seen something or someone she's afraid to name." Sir Henry's bells jingled faintly as he nodded. "That argument she mentioned Vane and Blake. It's cropping up too often to be coincidence." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful, "and her mention of Miss Grey running into the kitchen. I wonder if Mrs. Hodges saw her before the scream, or if there's more to that moment. Her thoughts returned to the pearl button, the scuff mark, the open doors. Clara's role gave her freedom to move unnoticed, but her nervousness suggested a burden, guilt, fear, or simply the weight of what she had overheard as the next guest was summoned. Miss Marple settled back, her hands folded in her lap. The drawing room's warmth did little to ease the chill of suspicion that hung over Greystone Manor. Clara Hodges's tale, like those before it, was a thread in a larger tapestry, one woven with secrets and half-truths. The truth, Miss Marple knew, lay in the details, the fleeting glance, the unguarded word, the shadow of a motive. She would watch, and she would listen. For in the quiet of St. Mary Mead or the grandeur of Greystone, the human heart always betrayed itself in the end. Chapter 7. The Friends' Facade. The drawing room of Greystone Manor, with its sombre firelight and ticking clock, had become a crucible where truths were tested and secrets strained to surface. Miss Jane Marple sat in her shadowed corner, her green velvet gown a quiet contrast to the room's opulence, her sharp eyes catching every nuance of expression. The air was heavy with the weight of the night's tragedy, the memory of Lawrence. Vane's lifeless form in the library casting a pall over the once festive manor. Inspector Harrow, his youthful face set with determination, continued his interviews, while Sir Henry Clithering lent a steady presence, his harlequin costume now a relic of a vanished merriment. Miss Marple, though silent, was a keen observer, her mind sifting through the fragments of testimony like a village spinster sorting gossip for truth. Roger Blake, the final key figure, was summoned. He entered with a measured stride, his gondolier, striped shirt and straw hat replaced by a plain jacket, his black mask discarded to reveal a handsome face with strong jaw and piercing blue eyes. His demeanour was composed, almost too polished, and Miss Marple noted the careful way he held himself, as if guarding against an unguarded moment. In St. Mary Mead she had known a young man, a charming curate, whose easy smile had hidden a penchant for petty theft. Roger's charm, she thought, was a similar shield, and she wondered what lay behind it. "Mr. Blake," Inspector Harrow began, his notebook open, his tone firm but polite, "you were a friend of Mr. Lawrence Vane. Can you tell us about your relationship with him?" Roger leaned back in his chair, his smile easy but not reaching his eyes. "Lawrence and I were old friends," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "We met years ago at a gallery opening in London, shared a passion for art, you might say, and a few business ventures. He was a good sort, generous, lively, though he could be reckless at times." His words were measured, but Miss Marple caught the faintest tightening of his jaw on the word reckless. "Reckless how?" Inspector Harrow asked, his pencil poised. Roger shrugged, a casual gesture that seemed rehearsed. "Oh, you know the way collectors can be, always chasing the next prize, sometimes without checking its pedigree. That Tintoretto of his, for instance, there was talk it might not be genuine, but Lawrence didn't care. He loved the thrill of the chase." His smile flickered, and Miss Marple noted the edge in his tone, as if the painting were a personal affront. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft as a whisper in a village parlour. "Mr. Blake, several people mentioned seeing you and Mr. Vane in a heated discussion near the library. Could you tell us what that was about?" Roger's eyes flicked to her, a flash of surprise, quickly masked by his easy charm. "Heated? Hardly, Miss Marple. Just a friendly disagreement, nothing more. Lawrence and I were discussing one of our investments, a gallery deal that went sour. He thought I was too cautious. I thought he was too impulsive. Old ground for us. His laugh was light, but his fingers drummed briefly on the arm of his chair. I tell Miss Marple recognized from a St. Mary Mead farmer who had lied about a missing sheep. Inspector Harrow's eyes narrowed. Where were you when the scream was heard? In the ballroom, Roger said promptly. I'd stepped away from Lawrence after our chat and was near the refreshment table, talking with a lady in a silver mask, Miss Grey, I believe. When the scream came, I followed the crowd to the library. His voice was steady, his gaze direct, but Miss Marple noted the way his left hand clenched briefly, as if gripping an invisible weight. Did you see anyone near the library corridor before that? Inspector Harrow pressed. No one, Roger said, his tone firm. The corridor was empty when I left Lawrence. He said he needed a moment to himself, something about checking a note. I didn't think much of it. His eyes met the inspector's, unflinching, but Miss Marple's mind seized on the mention of a note. Had Lawrence been lured to the library, or was Roger planting a seed to divert suspicion? Mr. Blake, Miss Marple said gently, her tone as disarming as a neighbour's chat over tea. You and Mr. Vane were close friends, yet your discussion seemed intense to others. Was there anything personal in your disagreement, perhaps beyond business? Roger's smile faltered, just for a moment, and his eyes darkened. Personal? No, Miss Marple, nothing like that. Lawrence and I had our differences, but they were professional, not personal. Friends argue, don't they? It's nothing out of the ordinary. But his voice carried a trace of strain, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead scandal where a friendly argument between two brothers had ended in a fistfight over a woman's affection. Inspector Harrow made a note, his expression skeptical. And you didn't see Mr. Vane again after your conversation? Not until the library, Roger said, his voice softening, as if with regret. I wish I had. Maybe I could have, shaking his head, and Miss Marple noted the calculated pause, as if he were playing the role of grieving. Friend, as Roger was dismissed, he rose with a nod, his composure intact but his eyes avoiding Miss Marple's. She watched him go, her mind turning over his words. His story was plausible, his charm persuasive, but the cracks were there: the clenched hand, the strained voice, the too quick denial of anything personal. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen such facades before, masking passions that ran deep. Roger's connection to Lawrence, she sensed, was more than business, and his mention of a note intrigued her. Was it a real clue, or a fabrication to muddy the waters? Sir Henry leaned close, his voice a low murmur. He's smooth, isn't he? Too smooth, perhaps. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes still on the door. He's hiding something, Sir Henry. In my village, a young man once smiled just so, while denying he'd stolen a kiss and more from a rival's fiancée. Mr. Blake's charm is a mask, and I suspect it conceals a wound. Sir Henry's bells jingled faintly as he tilted his head. That note he mentioned, think it's significant? Possibly, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful, or it's a distraction. But his tension with Mr. Vane was real, and not just about investments. Something personal festers there. Her thoughts returned to the library, the pearl button, the scuff mark, the open doors. Roger's alibi placed him in the ballroom, but the corridor's proximity to the library made his movements worth questioning, and Sylvia Grey, mentioned again her role, was becoming a thread that tied the suspects together. As the drawing room grew quiet, awaiting the next development, Miss Marple settled back, her hands folded in her lap. The firelight danced on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets yet to be uncovered. Roger Blake's facade, like those of Lady Beatrice, Felix, and Clara, was a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple knew that the truth, as it had in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, would emerge from the interplay of these hidden motives. She would watch, and she would listen, for the smallest slip could unravel the mystery of the fatal stab in the dark. Chapter 8. The Mask of Motive. The drawing room of Greystone Manor, with its sombre firelight and ticking clock, had become a silent battlefield where truths skirmished with half-lies. Miss Jane Marple sat in her shadowed corner, her green velvet gown a quiet anchor in the room's fading opulence. The interviews had ended, and Inspector Harrow had retreated to confer with Sir Henry Clithering, leaving the guests to murmur in the ballroom under the watchful eyes of the manor's footman. Miss Marple, excused from the formal proceedings, took the opportunity to wander, her small figure slipping through the crowd like a wisp of smoke. Her mind, sharp as ever, sifted through the testimonies, weaving them with the fragments she had observed: the pearl button, the scuff mark, the open French doors in the library where Lawrence Vane had met his end. The ballroom, though still grand, felt hollow without its music, the chandeliers casting a harsh light on the guests' unmasked faces. The Venetian carnival's enchantment had vanished, replaced by suspicion that hung like a fog. Miss Marple moved slowly, her sensible shoes silent on the polished floor, her eyes noting the subtle shifts in posture and glance. Lady Beatrice Langley stood near the grand fireplace, her gold-threaded gown catching the light as she reassured a cluster of guests, her smile strained. Felix Duval hovered by a display of his costumes, adjusting a sequined cape with trembling hands, his gaze darting toward the library corridor. Clara Hodges bustled near the refreshment table, her apron stained, her face flushed with more than the heat of the kitchen. Roger Blake leaned against a pillar, his charming facade intact but his eyes shadowed, watching the room with a predator's stillness. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to St. Mary Mead, where a village fate had once unravelled a theft when a maid's overheard whisper revealed a hidden grudge. Here, in the manor's grandeur, the same human currents flowed: jealousy, pride, betrayal. She paused by a window, the cool night air seeping through a crack, and considered the motives that might have driven a dagger into Lawrence Vane's chest. The Tintoretto painting, rumoured to be a fake, loomed large. Lady Beatrice, as host, had staked her reputation on its unveiling. A scandal could ruin her social standing. Felix, owed money by Lawrence, might have seen his financial ruin in the exposure of a forgery. Clara, with her ear to the servants' gossip, could have known too much or been drawn into a scheme. And Roger, whose friendly disagreement hinted at deeper wounds, might have acted on a personal betrayal. Her musings were interrupted by a soft sob from a nearby alcove. Miss Marple turned, her eyes catching the gleam of a silver domino dangling from a young woman's hand, Sylvia Grey, the tearful guest she had noticed earlier. Sylvia's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and she stood half-hidden behind a velvet curtain, clutching a crumpled handkerchief. Miss Marple approached, her voice gentle as a village confidante's. "Miss Grey, you seem distressed. May I offer you a moment's company?" Sylvia started, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Miss Marple, isn't it? I'm sorry, it's all so dreadful." Her voice broke, and she dabbed at her eyes. He was important to me. Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind but her mind alert. "You were close to Mr. Vane, then?" she asked, her tone as soft as a summer breeze. Sylvia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Yes, she whispered. We were engaged, secretly. He didn't want it known yet, not until after the party. He said there were complications. Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the word complications, a thread that might lead somewhere significant. Complications, she prompted gently, her eyes never leaving Sylvia's face. Sylvia's lips quivered. He wouldn't say much, only that there were people who wouldn't approve. I saw him pass a note to a lady in a peacock mask during the dancing lady, Beatrice, I think. It upset me, but he said it was nothing, just business. Her tears spilled over, and Miss Marple's mind seized on the note, recalling Roger's mention of one in the library. Did you see him with anyone else? Miss Marple asked, her voice as disarming as a neighbour's chat over tea. Perhaps Mr. Blake. Sylvia's eyes widened and she nodded. Yes, near the library corridor. They were arguing. Roger was angry, his voice low but sharp. I couldn't hear much, but Lawrence looked defiant. I didn't stay. I was too upset. She clutched her handkerchief, her shoulders shaking. Miss Marple's thoughts raced. Sylvia's account confirmed Clara's observation of a heated exchange. But the note added a new layer. Had Lawrence been juggling secrets business, romance, or both? She thanked Sylvia, offering a comforting pat, and moved toward the library corridor, her curiosity piqued. The manners halls were quieter now, the guests confined to the ballroom, and Miss Marple's small figure went unnoticed as she slipped into the corridor. The library doors were guarded by a footman, but Miss Marple had no intention of entering, not yet. Instead, she lingered near the terrace doors, now closed, where the scuff mark had caught her eye. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth, and she imagined the killer's path out through the French doors into the garden's shadows. But why the library? Why not the ballroom, where chaos could cover the act? The choice suggested intent, a meeting planned or provoked. She returned to the ballroom, her mind turning to the Tintoretto painting. A footman directed her to a small gallery room where it hung, covered by a velvet drape for its grand unveiling, now abandoned. Miss Marple lifted the drape, revealing a dark, swirling canvas of Venetian figures, its authenticity questionable even to her untrained eye. A maid, dusting nearby, glanced over nervously. "Beg pardon, ma'am," she said, "but there's talk that painting's not what Mr. Vane claimed. He was set to announce it tonight, but some said he'd prove it false himself." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A fake painting could ruin reputations, Lady Beatrice's for hosting its reveal, Felix's for his association with Lawrence's ventures, even Roger's if he were entangled in the deal. She thanked the maid, her mind weaving new connections. The note Sylvia mentioned, passed to Lady Beatrice, might concern the painting or something more personal. And Roger's anger, Clara's gossip, Felix's Detzel circled the same man. Now dead, as she rejoined the ballroom, Miss Marple's gaze settled on Roger Blake, still leaning against his pillar, his eyes tracking Sylvia as she slipped back into the crowd. His facade of calm, she thought, was cracking, and Sylvia's tears suggested a wound deeper than a failed business deal. In St. Mary Mead, a jilted lover had once smashed a rival's garden gate in a fit of rage. Here, she suspected, the stakes were higher and the weapon sharper. Sir Henry approached, his face grave. "You've been busy, Miss Marple. Find anything? Threads?" She murmured, her eyes on Roger. A note, a painting, a secret engagement. They all point to motives, Sir Henry, but the true one lies in what's not said. Her thoughts returned to the pearl button, its F a silent clue. Was it Felix's or another's? And the note, had it lured Lawrence to his death? The clock struck 1, the guests restless under the weight of suspicion. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded, her mind as active as ever. The mask of motive was slipping, revealing glimpses of truth, jealousy, greed, or perhaps a lover's betrayal. She would watch, and she would listen, for in the quiet of Greystone Manor, as in St. Mary Mead, the smallest detail would unmask the killer. Chapter 9. The hidden affair. The night had grown heavy at Greystone Manor. Its once vibrant ballroom now a stage of whispers and wary glances. The chandeliers, though still aglow, cast a cold light on the guests, their unmasked faces revealing strains of fear and suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, her green velvet gown blending into the shadows of an alcove, observed the scene with her characteristic quiet intensity. The interviews in the drawing-room had ended, and Inspector Harrow was now in the library with Sir Henry Clithering, examining the scene of Lawrence Vane's murder. Miss Marple, free to roam, moved through the manor's corridors, her sensible shoes silent on the polished floors, her mind weaving the threads of testimony and observation into a pattern that was beginning to take shape. The air was thick with the scent of wax and wilting flowers, the remnants of the Venetian carnivals. Splendor. Miss Marple's thoughts circled the clues she had gathered. The pearl button with its embroidered F, the scuff mark near the library's French doors, the note Sylvia Grey had seen Lawrence pass to Lady Beatrice, and the whispered rumours of a dubious Tintoretto painting. Each suspect, Lady Beatrice, Felix Duval, Clara Hodges, Roger Blake, had revealed cracks in their stories. But it was Sylvia's tearful admission of a secret engagement that stirred Miss Marple's intuition. In St. Mary Mead, she had unravelled a scandal when a young woman's tears betrayed a lover's betrayal. Here, she sensed, a similar passion might have driven the dagger into Lawrence Vane's heart. As she passed the conservatory, its glass walls misted with the night's chill, Miss Marple heard a low murmur of voices. She paused, her small figure half hidden by a potted fern, and peered through the glass. Inside, Roger Blake stood close to Sylvia Grey, their voices hushed but intense. Sylvia's silver domino lay discarded on a wicker chair, her face pale and streaked with tears. Roger's hand rested on her arm, his expression a mix of urgency and restraint. Miss Marple's ears, sharpened by years of village eavesdropping, caught fragments of their words. "He didn't deserve you, Sylvia," Roger was saying, his voice low and fervent. "He was playing with you, with all of us. I couldn't let him." Sylvia pulled away, her voice trembling. "Don't, Roger. Don't say it. I loved him, despite everything. If you knew." Her words broke into a sob, and she turned, her hands covering her face. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Roger's tone, his possessive grip, suggested more than friendship with Sylvia. She recalled Clara Hodges's gossip about Lawrence's secrets and Sylvia's mention of complications in their engagement. Had Lawrence's charm ensnared another, betraying Sylvia and, perhaps, Roger? In St. Mary Mead, a jilted lover had once set fire to a rival's shed in a fit of rage. Here, she thought, the stakes were far graver. She stepped back, intending to retreat, but a creaking floorboard betrayed her presence. Roger's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. As he spotted her silhouette, "Who's there?" he called, his voice sharp. Miss Marple emerged, her expression serene, her tone as mild as a village spinster's. "Only me, Mr. Blake," she said, her hands folded. "I was admiring the conservatory's flowers. Such a lovely spot, even At night, Roger's face relaxed, but his eyes remained wary. "Miss Marple," he said, forcing a smile. "You startled us. Sylvia's upset, as you can imagine. We were just talking, of course," Miss Marple said, her gaze flickering to Sylvia, who was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "It's a trying night for everyone, Miss Grey. Are you quite all right?" Sylvia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, thank you. It's just Lawrence. I can't believe he's gone." Her eyes met Roger's, and Miss Marple caught a flash of something fear. Perhaps, or a shared secret. "I'll leave you to your conversation," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but her mind racing. As she retreated to the corridor, she pieced together the scene. Roger's words, "I couldn't let him," hinted at a motive far beyond a business dispute. Sylvia's tears suggested a wound deeper than grief. Had Lawrence's complications involved another woman, one whose betrayal had sparked Roger's rage? Miss Marple returned to the ballroom, her thoughts turning to the note Sylvia had seen Lawrence pass to Lady Beatrice. Could it have been a romantic overture, or something else, a warning about the Tintoretto, perhaps? She sought out a footman, who confirmed that Lady Beatrice had been seen slipping a folded paper into her reticule during the dancing. The footman, a young man, with a nervous stutter, added, "I heard Mr. Vane tell her it was urgent, ma'am, but I didn't catch more." The note, Miss Marple thought, was a key. She recalled Roger's mention of Lawrence checking a note in the library, and Sylvia's account of the peacock masked lady. If Lady Beatrice had received it, why had she not mentioned it during her interview? Miss Marple's mind drifted to a St. Mary Mead widow who had hidden a love letter to protect her reputation. Was Lady Beatrice shielding herself, or another? She moved toward the gallery room, where the Tintoretto hung under its velvet drape. The maid she had spoken to earlier was gone, but a butler stood nearby, polishing a silver candlestick. Miss Marple engaged him in casual chat, her questions as innocuous as village gossip. "Such a pity about the painting's unveiling," she said. "I heard Mr. Vane had doubts about its authenticity." The butler's eyes flicked to the drape, his voice low. "Aye, ma'am. There was talk he'd hired an expert to inspect it tomorrow, said he'd expose the truth, whatever it was. Made some folks uneasy, I reckon." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving new connections. If Lawrence had planned to reveal the painting as a fake, it could threaten Lady Beatrice's social standing, Felix's financial ties, or even Roger's investments. But Sylvia's tears and Roger's heated words in the conservatory pointed to a more personal motive. She recalled Clara's gossip about Lawrence's wandering heart and Sylvia's mention of complications. Had Lawrence's charm ensnared another, perhaps someone close to Roger? As she returned to the ballroom, Miss Marple's gaze settled on Roger, now standing alone, his eyes fixed on the library corridor. His charm was gone, replaced by a taut intensity. She thought of Sylvia's words, "despite everything," and the possibility of an affair. In St. Mary Mead, a betrayed lover had once shattered a rival's window in a fit of passion. Here, she suspected, Roger's rage had found a sharper outlet. Sir Henry approached, his face weary. "You've been sleuthing, Miss Marple. Any new threads?" "A few," she murmured, her eyes on Roger. "A secret engagement, a hidden affair, a note that may hold the key. Mr. Blake's anger is personal, Sir Henry, and I suspect it stems from a betrayal close to his heart." Sir Henry's eyebrows rose. "An affair? With whom?" "That," Miss Marple said, her voice soft, "is what we must uncover. But the conservatory's whispers suggest Mr. Blake's sister may be involved." "A lover's betrayal can cut deep, Sir Henry. deeper than any business loss. The clock struck 2, the guests restless under the weight of the night's suspicions. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded, her mind as sharp as the dagger that had ended Lawrence Vane's life. The hidden affair was a thread that tied the suspects together, and she knew that in Greystone Manor, as in St. Mary Mead, the truth would slip through the cracks of passion and deceit. She would watch, and she would listen, for the smallest clue would unravel the mask of murder. Chapter 10. The clue in the costume, the air in Greystone Manor had grown heavy with the weight of suspicion. The once vibrant ballroom, now a shadowed arena where guests whispered in tense knots. The chandeliers cast a stark light, revealing strained faces and furtive glances, as the memory of Lawrence Vane's murder lingered like a chill that no fire could dispel. Miss Jane Marple, her green velvet gown blending into the alcove's shadows, moved with quiet purpose through the manor's corridors. Her sharp eyes and sharper mind pieced together the fragments of the night. The pearl button with its embroidered F, the scuff mark by the library's French doors, the note passed to Lady Beatrice, and the whispered affair that seemed to bind Sylvia Grey and Roger Blake in a web of grief and rage. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had unravelled a theft by noting a single misplaced thread in a seamstress's tale. Here, she sensed, a similar detail would unlock the truth, with Inspector Harrow and Sir Henry Clithering occupied in the library, cataloguing evidence. Miss Marple sought permission to examine the scene more closely. Sir Henry, trusting her acumen, gave a discreet nod, and the young footman guarding the library doors stepped aside. The room was as she had seen it hours before. Lawrence Vane's body now covered with a sheet, the dagger removed for inspection, and the Persian rug stained with a dark bloom of blood. The French doors remained closed, but the scuff mark on the floor, a smudge of dirt suggesting a hurried exit, drew her eye. She knelt, her movements careful, and studied the mark. It was faint, likely from a leather sole, and its angle pointed toward the terrace. A planned escape, she thought, or a moment of panic. Her gaze shifted to Lawrence's gondolier cape, draped across a chair where the inspector had placed it. The tear she had noticed earlier, near the shoulder, was not from the dagger's thrust, but from some other force, a tug, perhaps in a struggle. Miss Marple's fingers, delicate but precise, traced the fabric. The tear was jagged, suggesting resistance, and a few loose threads clung to the edge. She recalled the pearl button, found half hidden beneath the rug, its effort tantalizing. Clue: Felix Duval, the designer, had crafted Lawrence's costume, but had he made others with similar buttons, or did the F point elsewhere? She turned to the rug, her eyes scanning for further traces. The spilled brandy glass, its amber contents dried into the fibres, suggested Lawrence had been drinking, perhaps with his killer. The decanter on a nearby table was half full, its stopper intact, and no other glasses were evident. A private meeting, then, she thought, arranged in advance. Her mind flicked to the note Sylvia Grey had seen Lawrence pass to Lady Beatrice, and Roger Blake's claim that Lawrence had gone to the library to check a note. Had that note lured him to his death? Miss Marple stepped toward the French doors, opening them to let the night air sweep in. The terrace beyond was dark, the garden's hedges a maze of shadows. She imagined the killer slipping out, their footsteps muffled by the grass, their identity cloaked by the night. But the scuff mark suggested haste, not stealth. Had they been startled, perhaps by Sylvia's scream? She closed the doors and returned to the cape, her mind turning to the button. Seeking Felix Duval, she found him in the ballroom, still fidgeting with a display of costumes. His sallow face tightened as she approached, his hands clutching a feathered mask. "Mr. Duval," she said, her voice as gentle as a village confidante's, "I couldn't help but admire your work again. Mr. Vane's cape was exquisite, though I noticed a tear. Did you see it before the incident?" Felix's eyes darted to hers, then away. "A tear, Nan. Mademoiselle, I did not. It must have happened in the dancing, or later." His voice was strained, and his fingers shredded the mask's ribbon. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "And the buttons on your costumes, such fine work. I found one in the library, with an F embroidered. One of yours, perhaps?" Felix's face paled, and he shook his head vigorously. "Many use such buttons, mademoiselle. It could be anyone's. I made Mr. Blake's costume, too, similar style, but simpler." "Perhaps." He trailed off, his eyes widening as if realizing he had said too much. Miss Marple's mind seized on this. Roger's gondolier costume, less ornate than Lawrence's, might share the same buttons. Had the tear and the button come from a struggle between the two men? She thanked Felix, noting his trembling hands, and sought out a footman who had helped clear the ballroom. "Did you notice Mr. Blake's costume during the evening?" she asked, her tone casual. "Any damage, perhaps?" The footman, a lanky youth, frowned. "I did see Mr. Blake adjust his jacket near the library corridor, ma'am. Looked like he'd lost a button, his cuff was loose. I thought nothing of it at the time." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A missing button, a torn cape, a heated argument. She recalled the conservatory's whispers, Roger's fierce words to Sylvia, hinting at betrayal. Had Lawrence's affair, perhaps with Roger's sister, sparked a confrontation that ended in violence? In St. Mary Mead, a spurned lover had once broken a rival's fence in anger. Here, the weapon was a dagger, and the outcome fatal. She returned to the library, where Sir Henry was examining the dagger with Inspector Harrow. "Miss Marple," Sir Henry said, his voice low, "you've been poking about. Find anything?" "A thread," she murmured, her eyes on the cape. "The button in the librariette may belong to Mr. Blake's costume, and the tear suggests a struggle, not a sudden strike. Mr. Vane fought back. Sir Henry and Mr. Blake's anger, I suspect, was not about business." Harrow's eyebrows rose. "You think Blake did it?" "His alibi's the ballroom, with Miss Grey." "Alibis," Miss Marple said softly, "are only as strong as their witnesses." Miss Grey was upset, perhaps distracted, and Mr. Blake was seen near the library, his costume damaged. Her thoughts turned to Sylvia's tears, Roger's rage, the note that might have drawn Lawrence to his doom. The clue in the costume was a link tying Roger to the scene, but the motive, love, betrayal, or both, remained just out of reach. As the clock neared 3, Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded, her mind weaving the final threads. The costume's clue was a step closer to the truth, and in Greystone Manor, as in St. Mary Mead, the smallest detail, torn thread, a missing button could unravel a killer's mask. She would watch, and she would listen, for the truth was near, waiting to be stitched into place. Chapter 11. The unmasking, the first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of Greystone Manor's ballroom, casting a pale glow over the weary guests. The chandeliers, once sparkling with festive brilliance, now hung dim, their light muted by the weight of the night's tragedy. The air was stale, thick with the scent of spent candles and unspoken fears. As the guests, stripped of their Venetian masks, awaited the resolution of Lawrence Vane's murder. Miss Jane Marple stood quietly near the grand fireplace, her green velvet gown slightly creased, but her posture as composed as ever. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by the late hour, flickered over the key figures. Lady Beatrice Langley, her elegance fraying at the edges. Felix Duval, his nervous fingers still clutching a tattered scarf. Clara Hodges, her apron crumpled. And Roger Blake, his charming facade now a thin veil over a taut intensity. Miss Marple's mind was a tapestry of clues, each thread carefully woven, the pearl button with its embroidered F found in the library, the scuff mark by the French doors suggesting a hurried exit, the note Sylvia Grey had seen Lawrence pass to Lady Beatrice, and the torn cape, evidence of a struggle. The conservatory's whispers roared fierce words to Sylvia about Lawrence's betrayal had pointed to a motive rooted in passion, not profit. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had once solved a theft by noting a single glance between lovers. Here, she sensed, a similar passion had turned deadly. Inspector Harrow, his youthful face lined with fatigue, had concluded his evidence review with Sir Henry Clithering, whose harlequin costume now seemed a relic of a forgotten revelry. They had agreed to gather the suspects in the ballroom for a final reckoning, and Miss Marple, at Sir Henry's insistence, was invited to share her insights. The guests parted as she stepped forward, her small figure commanding attention not through force, but through the quiet certainty of her presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Inspector Harrow began, his voice steady despite the hour, "we have pieced together the events leading to Mr. Lawrence Vane's death. Miss Marple, whose perception Sir Henry vouches for, has observations to share. I ask you to listen carefully." Miss Marple's voice, soft but clear, carried across the room. "Murder," she said, "is a simple act with complex roots. In my village, St. Mary Mead, I have seen how small betrayals, love, trust, pride, can lead to great wrongs. Here, at Greystone Manor, the same human heart has woven a tragedy." She turned to Lady Beatrice, whose hands clutched her fan tightly. "Lady Beatrice, you hosted this splendid evening to honor Mr. Vane's Tintoretto painting, but rumors of its falsity threatened your reputation. You received a note from Mr. Vane, did you not, during the dancing?" Lady Beatrice's face paled, but she nodded. "Yes, a note about the painting. He said he'd prove its worth, but I burned it. It seemed unimportant after what happened." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the half-truth. The note, she suspected, held more than business. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Felix Duval, whose sallow face twitched. "Mr. Duval, you designed Mr. Vane's costume and were owed money for past work. The painting's exposure as a fake could ruin your ties to him. You were near the library corridor, adjusting a mask, but your alibi is weak. Did you see more than you admitted?" Felix's hands trembled, shredding his scarf. "I saw nothing, mademoiselle. I was busy, I swear." But his eyes darted to Roger, betraying fear. Miss Marple turned to Clara Hodges, whose flushed face betrayed unease. "Mrs. Hodges, you overheard Mr. Vane and Mr. Blake arguing, and you spoke of Mr. Vane's secrets. Your role gave you access to every corner of the manor. Did you see someone slip into the library?" Clara's hands twisted her apron. "I told you, I was in the kitchen. I saw nobody." But her voice was shrill, and Miss Marple sensed she was shielding someone, perhaps herself. Finally, Miss Marple's eyes rested on Roger Blake, whose calm facade had cracked, his fists clenched. "Mr. Blake, you called Mr. Vane a friend, but your argument was no mere business dispute. In the conservatory, You spoke to Miss Grey of betrayal. Mr. Vane was engaged to her, yet he had an affair with your sister, I believe." A gasp rippled through the room, and Sylvia Grey, standing nearby, stifled a sob. Roger's face drained of colour, his eyes blazing. That's preposterous," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple continued, her tone gentle but relentless. "The library tells the story. A torn cape, a struggle, a pearl button embroidered with an F, from your costume, Mr. Blake, lost in the fray. The scuff mark by the French doors, where you fled after the act. You followed Mr. Vane to the library, where he went to check a note, perhaps one you sent, luring him there. Your sister's honour, betrayed by his affair, drove you to rage." Roger's shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. "He ruined her," he said, his words a raw confession. "Lydia, my sister. Lawrence promised her everything, then cast her aside for Sylvia. I confronted him, begged him to stop. He laughed, said it was his right eye. I couldn't let him destroy her." His hands shook, and the room fell silent. Inspector Harrow stepped forward, his face grim. "Roger Blake, you're under arrest for the murder of Lawrence Vane." As the constable led Roger away, the guests erupted in murmurs, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Miss Marple stepped back, her work done, her eyes lingering on Sylvia, whose tears spoke of love and loss. In St. Mary Mead, a betrayed heart had once led to a broken window. Here it had ended a life. Sir Henry approached, his voice low. "Brilliant, Miss Marple. That button, how did you know it was his?" A guess, confirmed by his reaction. She said softly, "In my village, Sir Henry, the smallest clue a glance. A thread reveals the heart's truth. Mr. Blake's rage was his undoing." The dawn light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the ballroom. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the quiet of St. Mary Mead, where human nature, in all its frailty, was no different. The unmasking was complete, but the cost, she knew, would linger in the hearts left behind. Chapter 12. The quiet returned. The dawn had fully broken over Greystone Manor, its pale light filtering through the tall windows, softening the harsh edges of the ballroom's faded grandeur. The chandeliers, now extinguished, hung like silent sentinels above the weary guests, who dispersed in hushed groups, their voices subdued by the weight of Roger Blake's confession. The air carried the faint scent of burnt wax and wilting roses, a reminder of the Venetian carnival that had begun with such promise and ended in tragedy. Miss Jane Marple stood by a window, her green velvet gown slightly rumpled, her small figure framed against the morning mist. Her sharp eyes, though tired, held the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Yet her heart bore the familiar ache of human frailty laid bare. Sir Henry Clithering, his harlequin costume discarded for a plain coat, joined her, a steaming cup of tea in each hand. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm but tinged with weariness. "Inspector Harrow's grateful, though he'll never admit how much you guided him. That button, the tear, how do you spot these things?" Miss Marple accepted the tea, her hands cradling the cup's warmth. "It's no great trick, Sir Henry," she said softly, her voice as gentle as a St. Mary Mead breeze. "People are much the same, whether in a village or a manor. They wear masks, not just of silk, but of smiles and silences. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a girl's blush betray a stolen kiss. Here it was Mr. Blake's clenched fist, Miss Grey's tears, the button he couldn't hide." She sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the garden, where the first rays of Sun touched the dew-laden hedges. Sir Henry chuckled, though his eyes were serious. You make it sound simple, but it's uncanny. Poor Blake, his sister's honour drove him to murder, and poor Sylvia, caught in the middle. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze softening. Love is a dangerous thing, Sir Henry. It can lift the heart or break it. Mr. Vane's betrayal of both Sylvia and Lydia Blake was a spark in dry tinder. Roger's rage was not for money or paintings, but for a sister's shame. Such wounds cut deep. Her thoughts flickered to a St. Mary Mead widow who had wept for a faithless lover. Her grief a mirror to Sylvia's. They stood in silence for a moment, the manners quiet, settling around them. The guests had begun to depart, their carriages crunching on the gravel drive. Lady Beatrice Langley, her elegance restored but her eyes shadowed, was bidding farewell with forced grace. Felix Duval, his nervous energy spent, gathered his costume sketches, his face pale but relieved. Clara Hodges bustled in the kitchen, her voice sharp as she directed the staff, as if routine could erase the night's horror. Sylvia Grey, escorted by a friend left in tears, her silver domino clutched like a relic of lost love. And the painting? Sir Henry asked, his voice low. The Tintoretto, was it a fake after all? Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. I suspect it was, Sir Henry. The maid's gossip and Mr. Vane's own doubts suggest he meant to expose it, perhaps to embarrass someone, Lady Beatrice, or even Mr. Duval, whose debts tied him to Vane's. Ventures, but it was not the painting that killed him. It was his heart, wandering where it shouldn't. Her eyes twinkled briefly, a spark of humour amid the sombreness. Sir Henry shook his head, marvelling. You see it all, don't you? The note, the affair, the button. How did you tie it to Blake? The button was a guess, Miss Marple admitted, her voice thoughtful. But Mr. Duval's fear when I mentioned it, and the footman's tale of Mr. Blake's loose cuff, pointed the way. The tear in Mr. Vane's cape confirmed a struggle, and Roger's words in the conservatory. I couldn't let him, betrayed his heart. In St. Mary Mead, Sir Henry, a man once broke a rival's gate for less. Here the dagger was swifter. As the last guests departed, Miss Marple's hired car pulled up to the manor's entrance. She gathered her shawl, her lace mask tucked into her reticule, and bid Sir Henry farewell. You'll visit St. Mary Mead soon, I hope, she said, her tone warm. Wouldn't miss it, Sir Henry replied, his smile genuine. Though I suspect your village is as full of mysteries as this manor. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh, it has its share, Sir Henry, but they're smaller, quieter. A missing brooch, a whispered scandal, nothing so grand as a Venetian carnival. She paused, her gaze distant. Yet the heart is the same, wherever you go. She stepped into the car, the manor receding behind her as the driver navigated the winding drive. The countryside unfolded, its fields golden in the morning light, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to St. Mary Mead. Her cottage awaited, with its neat garden and her knitting by the fire. But her mind, ever active, was already scanning the village's quiet lanes for the next flicker of human nature, a glance, a whisper, a secret waiting to be unravelled. For Miss Marple knew, as surely as the sun rose, that wherever people gathered, mysteries followed, and she would be there, watching, listening, ready to lift the mask of truth.